Hey guys, SuperHorrorBro Mike here, and in today's Bendy and the Ink Machine video, we continue with part 2 of our deep dive into the story of Joey Drew. What happened to turn Henry's old friend into such a twisted nightmare? Well, if you haven't seen part 1 yet, pause this video and go check it out. In that video we discussed everything that happened up to the point of Joey's failed theme park, Bendyland. In this video, we pick up right there. Joey Drew was in financial danger. He needed to come up with an exciting new idea, and quickly. Something that would capture the hearts and minds of both audiences and his investors. That idea was to try and create living cartoon characters to inhabit Bendyland and put it back on track, turning it into the colossal wonder he had originally envisioned. So how did Joey intend to pull this scientific feat off? Well, you may remember this logo on your adventures through the studio. It is of course the logo for the Gent Maintenance Company. This company outsourced various workers, including Thomas Connor, to Joey Drew Studios to maintain the building and keep things running smoothly. They seemed to be a company involved with engineering and design. We hear Thomas Connor himself mentioning their involvement directly.
Progress report to Gent Home Office. Client, Joey Drew Studios. What started as a machine to simply mold life-size figures now seems to be teetering on the edge of magic more than engineering.
So Joey approached the Gent company with his idea, and it seems they took payment and got to work on its creation. This required Joey once again to expand the scope and scale of his cartoon studio. He began creating entirely new floors deep beneath the studio, secret research and design areas where he and his team of Gent workers could operate away from the prying eyes of his animators and other creative minds above. It was here the Ink Machine was most likely pieced together. The collaboration between Joey Drew and the Gent company spawned more than one iteration of the machine, but eventually a final design was built and ready to test. And Joey decided his first creation would of course be the dancing demon that brought him so much success in the past, Bendy. The problem was Bendy didn't turn out the way Joey expected. Instead of a mischievous replica of the cute character found in the cartoons coming out of the studio, Joey instead ended up with this thing. A mangled, soulless reject that Joey and the other workers involved in the project found terrifying and worried would scare away investors. And so they locked Bendy away, and Joey came up with an inhumane plan to rope in a naive voice actress called Susie Campbell and use her soul to create a living version of Alice Angel. You see, Joey realized after creating Bendy that he needed souls to bring his creations to life properly. They needed a personality. At this point, we should quickly reference a book Joey wrote around this time, a book called The Illusion of Living. While likely a book about the animation process, this title gives us insight into Joey's twisted mind and his plans to get involved with both occult rituals and weird science. His fake motivational speeches also display Joey's dark nature.
Well, Joey's into some weird stuff, man. Some weird cult, some weird books, and some weird stuff. Man, science. It's Joey we're talking about, man. Man, he's all into that money. Yeah.
In these recordings, he preached false promises in order to manipulate his overworked employees.
With true inner strength, you can conquer even your biggest challenges. You just have to believe in yourself. Okay, let's stop right there. I can only do so many takes of this trash a day.
Joey has long had ideas that are both overly ambitious but also work against the best interests of those around him. So back to Susie. Joey, the master manipulator who wanted a living, breathing human with a passion for one of his cartoon characters, approached this vulnerable young actress and made her an offer she couldn't refuse, to become the character she felt part of.
This is the first character I've really felt a connection with, so she's a part of me.
You see, Joey had replaced Susie with fellow voice actress Alison Pendle, and I believe he did this not because of Susie's lack of talent for the role, but rather so he could make her feel desperate enough to willingly take part in his first human experiment. Unfortunately for Susie, this didn't quite work out. After Susie's failed experiment, Joey seemed to turn his attention to the other workers at the studio, but again, these experiments didn't work as intended. Searchers seemed to be the earliest creations, followed by the Lost Ones, and eventually Butcher Gang members and Boris clones. The latter of which were the closest to replicate the look of a living cartoon, although ironically still have a person trapped inside. At this point, Joey was all out of options, and it seemed likely he would have had to close his studio and split ties with the Gent Company, who probably got cold feet the second they realised Joey was dabbling with the lives of real people. Not exactly a good look for a major corporation. It seems the whole process was deemed too inhumane to reveal to the public, and so the Gent Company walked, leaving Joey to clean up his own mess. Enter Henry. Joey's experiments had been disastrous, but seem not to have been revealed to the world outside his studio. We also get the idea that any worker who got wind of these secret experiments was dealt with, as Norman Polk's audio log states.
That projectionist they always say, creeping around, he's just looking for trouble. Well, trouble or not, I sees everything.
So it was fairly easy for Joey to contact Henry with the vague promise of having something to show him and not raise any danger signs. It is at this point we must recall the story of two real-life animators, Walt Disney and Ub Iwerks. Remember how in part 1 I explained how Ub had parted ways with his old friend and fellow animator Walt after creative differences and bad treatment. Much like the story of Joey and Henry. Well, Ub actually did return to Disney during the 1940s to work on the movie Song of the South and engineer a new animation technique which allowed for the first time ever for cartoons and real live actors to exist within the same frame on screen at the same time. Live action animation. And this is exactly what happened to Henry.
It's like the movie, what's it called? The Looney Tunes movie. It's like, yeah, it's like that Looney Tunes movie where they, it's where they freaking, go, where Donald Duck, no, not Donald Duck, wrong character, Daffy gets kicked out, gets fired. Yeah, it's that movie. Yeah, it's just like that.
When he returned to Joey Drew all those years later in the story of Bendy and the Ink Machine. Joey's workshop had been closed for a while now, and we know the studio Henry explores looks very different from the look of Joey's apartment. Joey's apartment looks how we expect somewhere to look in our reality. It looks realistic. Whereas the studio we explore in the game looks like it has been hand-drawn. It looks like a cartoon, because it is. But here is where the story seems to take a...
Wait, what? It is? Okay, Mike, HorrorBro, please tell me, how is it hand-drawn? Please tell me, sorry, I moved the tripod. Tell me, how the heck is it hand-drawn? Tell me.
Very dark and morbid turn. You see, Henry seems to be dead, judging by this newspaper clipping found within Joey's apartment. And we know this fate has befallen many of the other workers in the studio too, judging by these coffins. My theory, as previously discussed, is that Joey had created a cartoon world within the ink machine inside his apartment, one that has trapped the souls of old workers and is being sustained and projected by the larger of the two machines within. Basically, this giant machine at the end of Chapter 5 controls everything inside this world. Hence, when Henry plays the final reel titled The End, it essentially ends everything and loops it from the beginning again. Joey is then controlling things from the outside by feeding in storyboards he has created. We also get the sense that Henry isn't the only person he invited back, as we see he has kept close contact with other workers such as Alison Pendle and Thomas Connor. Of course, Tom worked directly on the ink machine and so had potentially damaging secret information. It seems Joey may have been taking out all
That's a good theory. I like it. I like the good theory. Man, that is so good. I like it.
employees linked with his company, and then using their souls within the ink machine in his apartment to create a living cartoon world. Each time triggered by the ritual process he has put in place, which powers on the ink machine inside. And Henry is the test subject in this experiment, the person Joey is using to remove all the kinks. After all, who would have better knowledge than his former partner? This seems like a logical conclusion to come to based on the Portal references found throughout the game. Portal is a game in which you assume the role of a hapless test subject trapped inside an old abandoned laboratory. What will Joey do once he has perfected his experiments? Will Henry's loop ever end? And will the souls of Joey's victims ever be set free? For answers to those questions, I guess we'll have to wait for another game. Or forever.
Oh, guys, I was freaked out. I was like, whoa. Bendy turned out... Man, Bendy was so cool when he turned out to be, like, a cool-looking freaking beast. When Bendy Chapter 5 came out, it was cool.
Have to wonder. After all, many of the best stories leave the ending up to the viewer's imagination.
Tell me another one, Uncle Joey.
And that's it for today's video. Please remember...
Alright guys, so this is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. So, leave a like. Comment down what video do you want me to react next. But what I think of this video, guys, man, I agree with this theory. I agree with that the last few seconds, the last minutes, I agree with, because it makes all sense, because Joey would be controlling it, and then Henry would be dead, and then it would make sense. So yeah, guys. So yeah, it would make sense. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed, guys. The original videos in the description. Make sure you go subscribe to SuperHorrorBro. Yep. Oh my goodness, this is gonna be a long reaction. So anyways, guys, so leave a like, comment down what video you want me to react next, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you ninjas later. Peace out, guys. What is up, my fellow ninjas? Greenninjatale here, and today we'll be reacting to the story of Joey Drew, What Really Happened Parts 1 and 2 by SuperHorrorBro. Now, this is a Bendy in the Ink Machine thing. So I hope you enjoy the original videos in the link in the description. Make sure to go subscribe to SuperHorrorBro if you haven't already. With that being said, let's begin. And let's begin.
Hey guys, SuperHorrorBro Mike here, and in today's Bendy and the Ink Machine video, we take a look at the story of Joey Drew. Joey has been a key character throughout...
Yeah, so today we're gonna be looking at what really happened to Joey Drew. So we're gonna be looking at, like, what happened to him while we left the factory, like Bendy and the ink, like, the ink, like the machine, the factory, and whatnot, and what happened to him, and how did he become Bendy?
Story of Bendy and the Ink Machine, despite the fact we never actually saw or interacted with him until the final moments of the game. Instead, Mr. Drew remains something of a mystery, referenced by characters here and there throughout the game's 5 chapters, and on occasion popped up to weigh in himself via monologues on these audio tapes. However, the story now has an ending, and for now at least, we have all the information we are likely to get in relation to Joey as a character and the building of his crooked empire that led to the eventual dabbling into human experimentation and the construction of the ink machine. With this in mind, I wanted to put together a video which compiled all of this information and told the story of Joey Drew and how I personally believed things went down at the old workshop, leading to Henry's eventual re-involvement with Joey and his tragic
And yes, guys, this is gonna be a long video.
imprisonment within his twisted cartoon world. This is part one of a two-part video in which we will look at the early years where we look at how two friends, Joey and Henry, started up an animation studio and the eventual catalyst that led Henry to finally turn his back on it all. The events that transpired after Henry left and the dark path Joey took chasing his dreams. Then in part 2, we will look at how Joey partnered with a gent company to create the ink machine, and years later, how this led Henry to become re-involved with his nefarious plans. By looking at these points, we should have a clear picture of how events transpired and how Joey became corrupted by his own success and failures over the years. So let us start by rewinding to the very beginning of this strange story, where two friends first embarked on the creation of something wonderful. Now quickly, I want to give my personal theory as to how Joey and Henry may have met. I believe these two friends first became acquainted during the war, more specifically during World War I. We know that the cartoons Henry and Joey worked on together were during the golden era of animation, which took place during the 1930s. And as World War II started in 1939 and ended in 1945, it would mean it was impossible for the two to be involved in this conflict directly. However, we do see the message by Bonds on many of the bendy posters
If you guys
found
hear stuff in
around
the background,
studio,
sorry, my brother's
which
playing
suggests
Fortnite.
both Joey and Henry were patriots who were involved in the war effort, and this is likely because they both once served together in the armed forces during World War I as young men themselves. This would have meant they formed a strong and lasting friendship, which explains why Henry stuck by Joey's side for so long, despite his obnoxious behaviour. It also explains the war references on the posters and the fact that Henry has a wheelchair appear in his flashback at the end of Chapter 1. The same wheelchair that showed up in Joey's apartment during the final moments of the story. This suggests Joey was perhaps injured during the war and so had to rely on the support of this chair in the years after. But like I said, this is just a theory, so let's move on to the formation of the studio itself. The most concrete information we have about the origins of Joey Drew Studios come from Henry's secret audio log found in Chapter 3, in which he has this to say.
Only 2 weeks into this company, and already it's gotten interesting. Joey is a man of ideas, and only ideas. When I agreed to start this whole thing with him, I thought there'd be a little more give and take. Instead, I give, and he takes.
Henry tells us that he agreed to start the company with Joey, but it seems as though his good friend was a bit of a dictator from day one. We get the sense from this recording that Henry was the passionate animator and Joey Drew the money-hungry businessman. He certainly embraced this character arc as the story went on. We also garner a further key piece of information from this recording. Henry was Bendy's original creator. This is reinforced by the secret message at Henry's desk, which states he was born here, next to a rejected Bendy concept art. Most interestingly is how the story of Henry and Joey parallels that of the real-life account of Walt Disney and his partner, Ub Iwerks. In this scenario, Joey Drew would symbolize Walt Disney, with Henry representing Ub Iwerks. Walt had created an animation studio, which Ub worked at tirelessly before it went bankrupt and he moved back to his old job at a different animation studio. Eventually, Walt managed to
that's a good one. That's a good theory right there. I agree with that. That's a good theory.
Open his own new company, Walt Disney Studios, and rehire his old friend and partner Ub Iwerks to get it off the ground. During this time, Ub put in an extraordinary amount of hours per month and worked tirelessly to help crank out cartoons on schedule. One of the characters he created alongside Walt Disney was the now famous Mickey Mouse. a character who would go on to represent the company. However, in the years that followed, tension grew between Walt and Ub, with Disney trying to take creative control away from iWorks despite the fact he was doing most of the creative heavy lifting. This led to a disgruntled Ub breaking ties with his friend and business partner and leaving the studio and his creation Mickey Mouse behind. Sound familiar? This is exactly what I believe happened between Henry and Joey at his studio. After many months, years even, of working himself into the ground at the behest of his controlling friend Joey, Henry decided he wanted to have an easier life and spend more time with his family, the Linda mentioned in this recording.
I haven't seen Linda for days now.
After all, we know Henry feels like the time he spent working with Joey was time wasted. But what happened next in the time after Henry turned his back on the studio? Well, the first thing Joey did, as we learned from Henry's remark at the beginning of Chapter 1, was to hire an entire team of animators to replace Henry. This was likely because Henry was both a highly talented animator, but also due to his friendship with Joey, was willing to work obscene hours constantly to keep the company on schedule. It is therefore unlikely that any other cartoonist would be willing to match this workload, and so Joey was forced to hire several animators to more fairly spread out the work. Which is what he really should have done when Henry was still at the studio. By hiring these extra animators, costs would have gone up, and this was potentially the reason Joey started dreaming bigger than ever before. If his outgoings were to rise, then he wanted to make sure the company income was also increasing. So, what did Joey do next to try and make all this extra money? Well, he increased the size of his studio for one. After all, we hear Henry mention this during the game.
Looks like they knocked out a wall or two after I left. Guess it took a few people to replace me.
By increasing the size of the studio, Joey would be able to ramp up production and churn out more and more cartoons. But to do this successfully, he would also want to create new characters. We saw this with the arrival of the bad guy trio, the Butcher Gang, but more notably with the creation of Bendy's female co-star, Alice Angel. However, Alice wasn't such a great hit, as we learn from an audio log featuring Sean Flynn, who worked on the toy production line.
And if he really wants to be so helpful, he could be telling me what I'm to be doing with this warehouse I got full of that angel whatchamacallit. And scrap it up, messy self.
Toys and other Bendy-themed merchandise, such as bacon soup, were of course two other ways in which Joey Drew hoped to expand his empire. And with the expansion of his studio, it allowed him to create an entire toy workshop, meaning nothing had to be outsourced and all profit would go directly to Joey himself. It also meant that all expenses and profit loss would fall squarely at his feet too. And as we know from one of Joey's audio logs in Chapter 5 and the notice board in his apartment at the end of the game, these losses eventually led to the closure of his studio and Joey himself
Joey got bankrupt.
filing for bankruptcy. The shame of such a grand failure would weigh down hard on anybody, but especially an egomaniac like Joey. Joey was a proud man who seemed to have narcissistic tendencies, so this failure would have been mentally damaging for him and
Well, that was terrifying for a minute. Bendy was inking all over his face. How'd you do that? That was creepy.
have sent him off the rails and down a dark path. But before we get to that, let us turn our attention to Bendyland itself, the colossal wonder designed and built by Bertram Piedmont at Joey Drew's request. This was likely Joey's last-ditch effort to revive his dying Bendy brand and save his studio from closure. With the success of theme parks such as Disneyland, it seems logical to conclude Joey fancied a slice of that proverbial pie for himself. But we know Bendyland was yet another failed project, as we see a picture of it on Joey's notice board alongside some ticket stubs, which suggests it was built and open to the public at one point, but not for very long. An expense this great was the final nail in the coffin for Joey Drew Studios. And this impending doom led Joey to consult with the Gent Company and collaborate on a large-scale project to bring his cartoons to life.
Apparently, Mr. Drew has another large project in mind now, and it ain't gonna be cheap.
just imagine a theme park full of living cartoons, not simply men and women in suits, but actual real-life cartoon characters your kids could interact with. It would be a scientific marvel and would have made Joey Drew a millionaire, saving Bendyland and his studio in the process. And so, the Ink Machine was born. But that's it for part 1 of the story of Joey Drew.
Oh my
Be sure
goodness.
to return for the second and final part of this twisted tale in the next few days, where we venture into the mind of Joey Drew.
Alright guys, I'll pull up part 2 because he uploaded part 2 one day or 2 days ago. So let me pull up part 2 of this. This is really interesting. Oh my goodness. If like one of the Bendy characters was real, boonk. Yeah, so let me pull up let me pull it up.